priest forever, for life. So he's kind of like the high priest emeritus. And so he still has a lot of clout and a lot of importance in the Jewish tradition. And so it's here that John reminds the reader of Caiaphas' earlier ironic judgment, right, that we talked about. Annas then begins to kind of question Jesus. It's kind of just a preliminary questioning concerning his disciples, his teaching. So the next section, it's kind of split up here with Peter's first denial, which we went over last week. But in verse 19 continues the narration there. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. I have spoken openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in synagogues or at the temple where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby struck him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said something wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him still bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. So here, John is before Annas, and Annas just starts to ask him about his teaching. He starts to ask about his disciples. He wants to know, hey, is there some kind of political thing going on here? What are you teaching about, Jesus? Because, of course, in that time period, you have various Jewish groups. We say that there are various Judaisms in the day of Jesus, right? There are Herodians, there are Sadducees, there's Pharisees, there's Zealots, right? And then there's this group called the Essenes, or the Dead Sea Scroll people who said, look, you guys are all corrupt, the temple's corrupt, the priesthood's corrupt, we're going to go out and create our own little perfect community out in the desert. And so they create the Qumran community where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And Jesus says to Annas, look, I'm not like one of those people. I haven't been doing things in a closet. I haven't been, using subterfuge here. I've been going to the temple and teaching. I've been going to your synagogues and teaching. And so if you want to know, this is not a secret. You can go ask people anywhere. And obviously that is seen as something impertinent, that kind of response, something that's disrespectful to the high priest. And so Jesus is slapped there. And it's interesting when you look at the story of Paul in Acts, when Paul is also before the council, a very similar thing happens there on the quote sheet there. While Paul was looking intently at the council, he said, brothers, up to this point, I have lived my life with a clear conscience. Then the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near him to strike him on the mouth. So this seems to be something that happens a lot in these Jewish councils. In the servant passages of Isaiah, we're more familiar with Isaiah 53 and that suffering servant passage, but in an earlier servant passage, it says, I did not hide my face from insult and from spitting. And so after that, Annas sends him to Caiaphas, but there's really not much or any mention of what happens with Caiaphas. So if you look at the end of verse 24, Annas sent him still bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. And then we have Peter's second and third denials, kind of splitting that up. And then moving on to verse 28. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning. To avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, what charges are you bringing against this man? If he were not a criminal, they replied, we would not have handed him over to you. Pilate said, take him yourself and judge him by your own law. But we have no right to execute anyone, the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Pilate then went back into his palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? I'm going to stop there for now. But Jesus before Caiaphas, I don't know if we have that little ossuary. Were you able to get that or not, Tobin? Oh yeah, so it's a bone box. So when people died in that culture, in Jewish culture, because they believed in the resurrection, they would make a ossuary, a bone box, which is large enough for the femur, which is the largest bone. And then once the body was decayed, they would put them, the bones in the box, and just, you're ready for resurrection. And this is Caiaphas's bone box, actually. They discovered this, I don't know, about 100 years ago, I think. And so it's the ossuary of Joseph Caiaphas. So kind of interesting. What? Oh. So John's obviously not interested in the dialogue that occurs between Jesus and Caiaphas, but there is a longer interrogation that happens, which Matthew records in Matthew 26. And in that passage, Caiaphas rends his priestly garments. He rips them when Jesus says who he is, and determines then that Jesus deserves death on the charge of blasphemy. But what John does is he kind of moves straight to the story of Pilate. So we have the Roman trial under Pilate. And in verse 28, then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. And it says, by now it was early morning. Well, literally it says it's the fourth watch. And the fourth watch is from 3 to 6 a.m. in the morning. And while that seems kind of early, some of you are early birds. I'm not a morning person. But actually that we know from other historical information that the Roman rulers, Roman governors in particular, would start very early in the morning. They would start their business early and work, and then end earlier in the day. And so I want to talk a little bit about Pilate. Pilate was, technically he's called the prefect. Sometimes you'll hear the word procurator used, which is not, that's actually a later term that's used under Claudius, the Emperor Claudius. So we actually have an inscription that was found in 1961 of Pontius Pilate. And his base would have been in Caesarea Maritima, which is Caesarea on the sea. So how many of you ever visited the Holy Land and been to Caesarea? Seen reconstructions of that palace. It's just amazing. It's right on the water, and there's this big pool that went out right into it was almost like an infinity pool, before those were cool. And it was something that was built by Herod the Great, who just had all these amazing building projects. So anyway, that's where Pilate would have been stationed as the governor of Judea. And he was governor for about 10 years, from 26 to 36. So they did kind of an inset there to tell you, it's broken off on the left, but it would have said something Tiberium, Pontius, Pilatus, and then down on the bottom, Pontius Pilatus, prefect. Right, that's where we get the correct title for his position. In 36, he was recalled to Rome. He had to stand trial before the Roman emperor because there was an insurrection of Samaritans. And what Pilate did was he basically massacred a whole city of Samaritans. And this didn't go over well with the powers above him, both in Syria, where the Roman ruler in Syria was over him, and then, of course, in Rome. And so we'll see that Pilate wasn't really a very nice guy. Sometimes when you're reading the Gospels, you think, well, this is a guy, an enlightened ruler. But no, he's very pragmatic, but could also be very cruel. And so it's interesting because Pilate is mentioned in a lot of different writings. We have him in the Jewish historian Josephus. We have him mentioned in Philo, who's a Jewish philosopher from Alexandria. And the kind of the ironic thing is, here's this pagan Roman ruler who is mentioned by name every day for 2,000 years in the tradition of the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, right? Because in the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church, every day they have a Mass or a tradition where they'll say the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed. In the Apostles' Creed, it says, Jesus suffered under Pontius Pilate. Or in the later Nicene Creed from 325 AD, Christ was crucified for us under Pontius Pilate. And so I put a few quotes from some of these historical resources to give us a little bit of background into Pilate. Philo Judaeus. Pilate was a man of very inflexible disposition, very merciless as well as very obstinate. He feared that they might impeach him because of his corruption, his acts of insolence, his rapine, his habits of insulting people, his cruelty, his continual murders of people untried and uncondemned, and his never-ending and gratuitous and most grievous inhumanity. Wow, it's like, I don't think he liked him. And that could really also describe Herod the Great, if you've ever read anything about Herod the Great, who killed his own kids, his wives, and just for spite sometimes would set up murders of people. And we have a little bit of an intimation of that in the Gospel of Luke, and this is a tradition that's only in Luke 13. At that very time, there were some present who told him, Jesus, about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. What? And we have no information about what this is about, but it's some kind of an atrocity where Herod killed these Galileans who were coming to Jerusalem for the sacrificial system, and somehow got to mix their blood in with the sacrifices. I mean, you can imagine the headlines the next day in the Jerusalem Post. It's like, what? How can somebody get away with that? Josephus, a Jewish historian he was a priest who worked in the temple, then became a general in the war against Rome. Then he was captured, then he got a cushy retirement in Rome and became a historian. And luckily, we have all of his histories of the Jews and history of the Jewish war, and it's just amazing historical references to this time period and situations. But he tells us about one of several instances of Pilate. By stealth of night, Pilate brought into the city of Jerusalem busts of the emperor that were attached to the military standards, when our law forbids the making of images. For this reason, the previous governors used standards which had no such ornaments. The next morning, the Jews were indignant and hurried to Pilate in Caesarea, imploring him to remove the images. So you can see that Roman standard there on the right. This is for the Legion number 10, Fretensis, which was stationed in Palestine. And you can see the head on it underneath. That's Tiberius Caesar, who is the emperor in this period from 14 to 37 AD. And amongst the soldiers, there was often what we call a cult of the emperor. And the emperors, beginning in this period and then increasing towards the end of the first century, would actually have temples built in their honor, sometimes in conjunction with other gods, like the goddess Roma and Domitian, or Apollo and Nero. And so Josephus tells us that he's trying to get these standards, which are idolatry, to the Israelites, because they've got images on it, and not just images, but images that are in a sense worshipped by people. And what he goes on to tell us is that the Jews go up to Caesarea and they march to his palace and they say, we're not going to accept this. And Pilate had organized a bunch of soldiers to kind of surround this group of people, and on his word, they were supposed to pull out their swords and kill him. Well, when they pulled out their swords, the Jews said, yeah, well, here, go ahead. Kill us. And he backed down. Because he knew if something like that happened, and especially with the obstinacy of the Jews here, that would get back to Rome, and he would not last very long, because Rome really prized order, and any kind of insurrection was not just a reflection of the people that you're governing, it's also a reflection of the fact that you can't control these people. You're not using wisdom. We also have in Josephus the very famous quotation related to the story of Jesus. At this time, there was a wise man called Jesus, and his conduct was good. He was known to be virtuous. Many people among the Jews and the other nations became his disciples. Pilate condemned him to be crucified and to die. But those who had become his disciples did not abandon his discipleship. They reported that he had appeared to them 3 days after his crucifixion and that he was alive. And the tribe of Christians, so named after him, has not disappeared to this day. Well, that day was somewhere in probably the 90s, 80s or 90s AD. And we're still here, right? Tacitus, who's a Roman historian, tells us what happens after the fire of Rome in 64 AD, where pretty much most of the city of Rome was burned down, and people blamed Nero. They thought he was a megalomaniac, which is true, and that he set the fire on purpose, and he wanted to rebuild Rome and call it Neropolis. And so to suppress the rumor that he started the fire, Nero fabricated scapegoats and punished with every refinement the notoriously depraved Christians, as they were popularly called. Their originator, Christ, had been executed under Tiberius's reign by the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilatus. But in spite of this temporary setback, the deadly superstition had broken out afresh, not only in Judea, where the mischief had started, but even in Rome. And he goes on to talk a little bit more about that event there. So we get a little bit of the character, the disposition, the attitude, and responses of Pilate there. Moving to the back then, Pilate and Jesus' accusers. I already read that section there. So Jesus is led from the high priest's residence to Pilate's temporary headquarters in Jerusalem. So in the Greek there, it's called the Praetorium. And it's a special palace. I think it was also built by Herod. And outside the palace, you have a courtyard. And because it's Passover, the Jewish governor or the Roman governor would often stay in Jerusalem because he wants to be right there, because Passover is a very volatile period and very volatile festival. You have pilgrims, thousands of pilgrims coming from all over the empire to celebrate the Passover. And the spirit of nationalism gets very intense. And there can be all kinds of issues and insurrections and uprisings. And so there's a Roman garrison kind of right on the corner of the temple called the Tower of Antonia. And there's a Roman troops stationed there, and Pilate wants to be right where the action is going to be. And so you can kind of think of like Mecca, right? When you have, in Islamic tradition, you have the Hajj, where every good Muslim is supposed to travel to Mecca at least once in their life and go to the Hajj and to gather around the Kaaba and to then they celebrate. And one of the festivals is called Eid al-Adha, and I think it's in December, so it's coming up, where they sacrifice animals just like in Judaism. And years ago, I had a student in one of my classes, an older student who was in the Navy, had been in the Navy, and he had been stationed in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And he said one day he watched a big ship, container ship, come in, and then these ramps went down, and it was like Noah's Ark. It's like all these animals, sheep and goats and camels and whatever, just started piling out, right? And some of these ships, I was looking this up on YouTube, they're just these state-of-the-art ships that come from like Australia, and they've got these, stainless steel pens where the cattle are fed automatically from computers and so on, and they're just treated like royalty on the ship. You get a cruise, except at the end of your cruise, it's like you're going to get slaughtered and sacrificed. And this is very similar to what's happening in Jerusalem during the Passover feast. And so John notes there the supreme irony of the Jewish leaders not entering Pilate's palace for fear of ritual contamination. Okay? They don't want to go in the house of a Gentile because that's against Jewish tradition and Jewish ritual purity laws. Now, probably what's happening here is because the temple also has a purity pool. It has a mikveh where you would take a ritual bath. And they could have done that the next day, except that what's probably happening here is that they're concerned for what they call 7-day contamination. So if they get contaminated by getting close to anything like with a dead body, a corpse, or other things, menstruation, they would have 7-day impurity. And so then they couldn't celebrate the Passover, right? So they're very concerned about that, so they don't want to go in Pilate's palace. And I put a quote there from the Mishnah, which is the Jewish regulations. There's a whole chapter of, many, many pages on the ritual purity code. It says, the dwelling places of the Gentiles are unclean. And then it lists, there's 10 places where they're not unclean. So these are your exceptions, right? And I didn't put them all. But the dwelling places of the Gentiles that do not apply are the tents of the Arabs, field huts, and then notice it says the open space in a courtyard, a bathhouse, and so on. So this is where the Jews are. They're gathered in the courtyard of Pilate's palace there, and they're not going to go in. You see that even in the book of Acts, where Peter has his encounter with Cornelius, the Gentile, also a Roman centurion. And Peter has to have this vision of a cloth let down with these unclean animals. 3 times it takes Peter. And then when he finally goes to Cornelius' house, he reminds them, you yourselves know it's unlawful for a Jew to associate with or even visit a Gentile. I'm not supposed to be in here. And he's going to get asked about that later in chapter 11. You went into the house of a Gentile? Right? These are Jewish Christians, who are still very concerned about ritual purity. And so it's really ironic because they're so concerned about ritual purity so that they can celebrate the Passover and sacrifice the Passover lamb when they are in the midst of sacrificing the Passover lamb, Jesus, right? And Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians 5. He says, for our paschal lamb, Christ, has been sacrificed. So there's an issue here about the nature of the charges and then the issue of capital punishment. So is it a religious charge, or is it a political charge, or is it both? When you read the Synoptic Gospels, it particularly in Luke, you could kind of read it that they have the Sanhedrin, they have the council, they get together, and Jesus says something. They say, he needs to be killed for blasphemy. But the problem is that they don't really have the legal right to use capital punishment. And another problem in relation to John's gospel is that the penalty for blasphemy was stoning. Okay, so I put a little quote there from Leviticus. One who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. The whole congregation shall stone the blasphemer. Aliens as well as citizens, when they blaspheme the name, and we talked about the name, Hashem, shall be put to death. But in Luke, they say, we don't have the right to do this, so we need to also have some kind of a political charge. And so we're going to send him to the Romans. And we don't have any kind of specific outside information that the Jews couldn't practice capital punishment. We do have other cases where they seem to be able to kill people, at least for religious reasons, right? So the woman taken in adultery, they're about to stone her, right? Earlier in John. What do they do to Stephen in Acts? They stone him. There's a sign all around the temple at that time period in the court of the Jews. There's a warning sign. They've actually found 2 of these warning signs from the period of Jesus that were right on the wall. There's like a little balustrade, like a 3-foot wall that keeps Gentiles out of the next section, holy section of the temple. And it basically says, Gentiles, don't come in here or you're dead, right? And so they had the right to actually execute even Gentiles for going in there. And I think this was part of the Roman understanding of keeping crowd control, in a sense, is that, well, we don't want a big uprising over this. And if you read later in Acts, this is one of the issues that Paul gets arrested for. Hey, you brought Gentiles into the court of the Jews. And so what's happening here is that I think it's a combination of things. There's a charge of blasphemy, there's a religious charge, but there's also a political charge that's related to their understanding of Jesus as a king, as a ruler. And of course, the only king around there is the emperor. And so this begins a series of questions related to the identity of Jesus. We're going to watch a little bit of a video, hopefully. It's a little of a challenge trying to get all this stuff to work, and I'm not sure it's going to stream, but we'll hopefully it will. But this is a little clip from a very interesting series called Who is Jesus? It's on it's a Discovery Channel DVD from a few years ago, and I think you can buy it for like $7. But they actually do a really good job for kind of a secular presentation. I mean, even at the end of it, they go, well, maybe there was a resurrection, you know. But I want to watch a little bit of the clip of Jesus' arrest and the trial before Pilate. But I want you to, there's two things in here that are not very accurate, okay, in relation to what we've just been talking about. So pay attention to that. Is it going to work? Yeah. Turn off the lights.
So this is an area of the wealthy, and Jesus is only brought here after his arrest.
According to the first three Gospels, there's some kind of trial before the priestly leadership.
He's brought to this neighborhood, brought into the courtyard of the house of the high priest, and then the deliberation takes place.
The Jewish priesthood, threatened with seizure of the temple by their Roman overlords, saw little choice. Jesus was a religious and a political threat, plain and simple, and had to be dealt with. The priesthood assembled members of their council, the Sanhedrin, to interrogate Jesus. The Gospels tell us that Jesus did little to deny the charges brought against him. The priests branded him a blasphemer, the ultimate crime, deserving the ultimate punishment. But the priests did not have the final authority. Jesus was now handed over to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, a brutal disciplinarian who ruled with an iron fist. From his trial before the priests, Jesus was taken to the residence of the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. This was called the Praetorium. It had once been the palace of King Herod the Great. Pontius Pilate hated Jerusalem. He came to the
His chances are not good, at least according to all that we know about Pilate. He's
the quintessential hanging judge of antiquity. The Gospels try to read him otherwise, but not a very nice fellow.
However tragic in its outcome, this was an extraordinary confrontation. A poor preacher from rural Galilee, face to face with the most powerful man in the land. It was a measure of how significant a figure Jesus had become. According to the Gospels, Jesus faced Pilate with defiance.
No.
Pilate had no reason to show mercy.
Stauroson auton.
And so began the path of suffering,
Okay.
the Via Dolorosa, which the Gospels tell us Jesus endured between trial and execution.
Does anybody notice the discrepancy there? What? He said yes. Yeah, that's one thing. We're going to talk about that, actually. Did you notice who was up in the room with Pilate? The priests. Yeah, they're not supposed to be there, right? According to John, they're not there. So not very accurate there. So it's interesting. We're under number 2 here, and we'll finish up. Pilate and Jesus. John presents Pilate's alternating interactions with the Jews and then Jesus in a highly dramatic series of 7 inside versus outside confrontations. So this is something really unique to John. There's like these 7 little vignettes, and Pilate's kind of going inside to talk to Jesus, then he's going outside to talk to the Jews. Inside, outside is like 7 times almost. And but the first question that he asked Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? This is one of the few places, and in the Greek it's exactly the same in all 4 Gospels. Are you the king of the Jews? So it's a kind of unique tradition that we see all across the Gospel narrative. But everything else, pretty much everything else in this section of John is unique to John, his dialogue with Pilate here. And I probably should read a little bit more from verse 33, are you the king of the Jews? I'm going to read the NIV, although so I have some issues with it. So, is that your own idea, Jesus asked? Did others talk to you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you're right in saying I'm a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Pilate asked. So the first question there, are you the king of the Jews? There's kind of an issue of what is Jesus really answering here? Okay, is Jesus agreeing with Pilate? And this is where there's little subtleties in your translations, and I don't think the NIV is quite accurate here. The NRSV, which is kind of the more literal translation, on your sheet there on the left. Pilate asked him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king, period. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world to testify to the truth. Now you look at the NIV. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you are right. Well, it's adding words here. You are right is not in the Greek. Okay? Saying I am a king, in fact, is also not in the For this reason is not in the Greek. Okay? For this I was born, for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Now, when you read the NIV, the this kind of naturally reads as, I came into the world to be a king. In the NRSV, the this is, I came in the world to testify to the truth. Do you see the difference? And so when you go to the other three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus' answer is just two words in Greek. You say so. Well, you say, but in English we say you say so. And actually, literally, it would just say you say. Okay? So Jesus is not wanting to specifically say, yeah, I'm a king, because there's an issue here of what they think a king is and what kind of king he is, right? And so the idea here is more like, those are your words, not mine, Pilate. You think I'm a king? Well, okay, but what kind of king do you think I am? And earlier in chapter 12, we have the triumphal entry story where the crowds hailed Jesus as king there. But John never presents this idea that Jesus accepts that, at least on their terms. So he neither confirms nor denies whether he is a king. And so this nuance and this hesitancy kind of hangs on contrasting perceptions of kingship and of rule. And so when Jesus says, my kingdom is another issue with the NIV. It says, my kingdom is not of this world. Well, it doesn't say that in the Greek. So we talked about this the other day. So you have these prepositions in Greek, and you have this preposition ek, which means out of. You have another preposition eis, which means into. You have another preposition en, which means within something. And it's kind of important to kind of keep these separate. So he doesn't say my kingdom is not of this world. He says my kingdom is not out of this world. It doesn't come from this world. Okay? It doesn't mean it's not related to this world in some way. And we see that in chapter 17 when we talked about the disciples, right? Is that they're in the world, they're called out of the world in order to be what? Sent back into the world, right? And so there's a good quote there from N.T. Wright. Jesus' answer is both apparently incriminating and deeply revealing. His kingdom does not come from this world. Please note, he doesn't say, as some translations have put it, read NIV, my kingdom is not of this world. That would imply that his kingdom is altogether otherworldly, a spiritual or heavenly reality that had nothing to do with the present world at all. That is not the point. Jesus, after all, taught the disciples to pray that God's kingdom would come on earth as in heaven. No, the point is that Jesus' kingdom does not come from this world. Of course it doesn't. The world, as we've seen again and again, is in John the source of evil and rebellion against God. Jesus is denying that it has a this worldly origin or quality. He is not denying that it has a this worldly destination. That's why he has come into the world himself, and why he has sent and will send his followers into the world. His kingdom doesn't come from this world, but it is for this world. So we have to be careful of kind of this dualistic thinking, which sometimes we see in Christianity, of dissing the world that God created and thinking that, it's all about getting out of the world or going to heaven or dying. And Jesus says, no, it's about saving the world. God so loved the world, right? The cosmos there in Greek. And so I put the next sections where, I knew we weren't going to be able to get to this last part. So next time we'll continue on there. But one of the things I'd like to end on is talking a little bit about the difference in Jesus' kingdom. Is, as we've talked about a lot in this class, the idea of the upside down kingdom. When Jesus says, my kingdom is not from this world, it's not like the kind of kingdom, it's not like the kind of rule that Pilate and even the priests and many other Jews were hoping for and thinking. It's not about might. It's not about military power. It's not political. It's not about domination. It's about actually giving up life, right? And this is why it's not good enough that Jesus is just going to get stoned for blasphemy, because John, from the very beginning of the gospel all the way through, says that Jesus has to be what? Lifted up, right? And that can only come from crucifixion. And so it's about giving up rights. It's not about taking rights. And one of the guys in our SALT group this week sent me this link to this interesting article, and it's from the Christian medical doctors and dentists, and relating to the COVID. So they put out this statement of the vast majority of healthcare professionals who have been infected with SARS did not become infected at their workplace. Studies have shown that most healthcare professionals became infected predominantly in the community. It is when they go to church, celebrations, and small gathering with friends outside their immediate family that they become infected. As an association of Christian healthcare professionals, CMDA has been wrestling with the role God would have us play in this pandemic. Christian Medical and Dental Association endorses the efforts of state and federal government authorities to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus by limiting large gatherings. We believe that churches that ignore those instructions are placing their congregants at increased exposure and risk of COVID, and therefore we cannot condone such decisions or actions by churches. Despite these efforts, CMDA is saddened to learn not only that many churches have ignored our guidelines, but that congregants have become infected with COVID as a result of those decisions. One of us is personally aware of several recent weddings when people did not mask or engage in social distancing, which resulted in the entire wedding party and family being infected. This is not only unfortunate, it's unloving. It is tragic to see Christians become even more reviled because we appear to care only about our individual freedoms and don't care that we may be contributing to others getting this illness because of our selfishness. As Christian healthcare professionals, we will voluntarily restrict our freedoms for a time to help protect our neighbor. There's a lot more on there, but I thought that was interesting because, you know, as you see, there are doctors quitting their profession. There are nurses who are quitting their profession because of the struggle that they're going through, everything that they're seeing. They just can't take it anymore. There are doctors who have committed suicide. There are nurses who have committed suicide. So this isn't the flu, folks. It's something more dangerous, and we don't even know what's going on with a lot of it. We don't know the ramifications. So part of the upside-down kingdom is giving up our rights for the sake of other people. And this is what Jesus is exhibiting here in our story. Let's pray. Thanks, Father, for this story of Jesus. Help us to live out this upside-down kingdom in our relationship with others around us. Help us to be sensitive. Help us not to politicize what is something that should be a thing of compassion. In Jesus' name, amen.